I'm going to give you a tool that should help you remember the responsibilities of the copy editor. These are the 5 C's of copy editing: correctness, consistency, clarity, concision, and consideration. Let's start with correctness. So what is correct? When you took grammar, you learned a somewhat prescriptive approach to grammar and to writing. Now, we all know that language evolves, but when we study grammar, we are looking at a snapshot in time. What are the acceptable standards right now? It's a little bit different when you're looking at your responsibilities as an editor. It is the responsibility of the editor to understand what is correct for a particular audience, for a particular, maybe even subject matter, certainly for a particular purpose, genre, and medium. So all of these factors play a role in the editor's decision of what is correct and what is not. Often you might look at a document and you might see some conventions that are out of date. Perhaps there is a rule that's no longer being followed or should only be followed in certain circumstances. So all of these things need to be taken into account. Of course, at the same time, the editor is also applying the rules of grammar where it's appropriate. They're applying the rules of punctuation and the rules of usage. You should also be very aware of the types of errors that your writer might make. One of the key errors that writers often make is misused words such as lay and lie, or loathe and loathe. We saw that on one of the recent exercises that you had. There are many of these confused words. The English language has evolved over time, and so there are many words that have very similar meanings. There might be a certain nuance or difference, and people get this confused. Think of affect and effect. Think of continual and continuous. These are all examples of these commonly misused words. You'll also find that within perhaps a certain organization or within a certain genre, you might find that there are these things that you have to watch for. I find that when I'm marking a first-year paper, I'm looking for different things than I am, say, when I'm marking a third-year paper. I'm looking for different things when I'm marking a grammar essay than when I'm marking a creative nonfiction piece. And this is based on experience and having seen many papers over the years and kind of getting a sense of the kinds of errors that students make at various times during the course as well. Usually the papers that come in at the beginning of a course are different than the papers that come in at the end of a course. But I have in my head this little checklist. So as an editor, say you're working at an organization, you too will develop a little checklist. You'll start to get used to the kinds of errors that people make when they're writing. And particularly if you're working for a single organization, you'll probably pick up on this fairly quickly. If you are freelancing, then every job might be just a little bit different. We also need to know the difference between applying the rules of grammar and the rules of style. Again, the rules of grammar, while not static, are more static than the rules of style. So we've looked at a few style guides, and these style guides reflect the expectations of a certain audience, of course. So Canadian Press Style Guide is used by journalists and PR professionals, business communicators. So that's a whole different set of expectations than, say, the APA Style Guide, which is primarily used by academics. So how are we going to apply these rules of style, these rules of grammar? Fact-checking. Fact-checking often becomes the responsibility of the copy editor. The proofreader might do a light fact check, and certainly in today's world, it's often the responsibility of the author to do the majority of the fact checking. But you will find that copy editors are often asked to do, at minimum, a light fact check, or at least be aware of things that might be problematic. Often, they are expected to do a much more comprehensive fact checking, and we will be talking about fact checking later. Consistency. So, consistency is one of those things that editors are concerned about because being consistent within a document makes the document easier for the reader to read, and it shows professionalism. So this might consist of enforcing a particular style guide. It's also likely going to be the job of the copy editor to start and maintain a style sheet. We'll be talking about style sheets later, but essentially a style sheet addresses particular problems and issues to that particular document. So specific things that editor has noted that they want to be consistent for that particular document. They will have to not only enforce the style guide, but enforce whatever dictionary has been chosen for that document or that organization, and decide perhaps to make some exceptions to the use of that dictionary. And of course, just in general terms, they will have the responsibility of ensuring the decisions made regarding punctuation, mechanics, and spelling are applied consistently throughout the document. So to achieve and maintain clarity in a document, a copy editor should do the following. They need to watch for unnecessary redundancy as well as ambiguity. They need to watch, for example, things like ambiguous pronouns. Ambiguity is the problem of the meaning not being clear. And this can happen if we're using any kind of ambiguous word that can be taken in a number of ways, understood by different people to mean different things. It's also important that transitions are smooth and take the reader forward within the document so that they help to enhance understanding. Paragraphing. Generally, paragraphing means the order in which the elements of a paragraph are presented. So often we have a topic sentence and then the various other elements of a paragraph. It's often the case that information is presented in an awkward way. And so we have to be able to see that when we're editing. There's something wrong with this paragraph. What's wrong with this paragraph? Oh, I see. This sentence should actually be here. And then the paragraph flows much better. We need to have a sense of what jargon is important and what jargon isn't important. Perhaps you're editing an academic piece and there's particular jargon for that discipline that makes perfect sense for it to be there. Maybe sometimes we're editing for a different audience though, and suddenly that jargon is no longer useful for that document. And we have to perhaps discuss that with the author or supply different suggestions for terms. Slang. When is slang useful and when is it not? Catching empty words, and so on. Concision. Concision really is about avoiding word clutter. So we really want to reduce wordiness within a document. We want to get rid of those words that really aren't helping at all. that are not adding meaning to the document. And in some genres, we want the writing to be quite tight and sparse. Other documents, perhaps it's more appropriate for a writer to elaborate more on a subject. Either way, if a word isn't adding to the meaning, then it shouldn't be there. We're often looking at editing out the ums of writing. So those little extra words that people use or add into their writing habitually. Things like qualifiers and intensifiers. These conversational things that we use in everyday language, and it makes perfect sense, but are not as appropriate for most written forms of language. We want to create, quite often, a direct message. And we also want to make sure that we're doing this while remaining conscious of the author's style and voice, if that's appropriate, of course. If we're editing something like a technical manual, then it's not appropriate for the author to have a style or a voice. Consideration. So many of these Cs have a lot of overlap. I've already mentioned some of these things in the lecture earlier. So we need to consider the age of the audience, the knowledge of the audience, the education of the audience, the language level of the audience. What is the purpose of the communication, the medium? Are there aspects of sexism, racism, ageism, whatever that we need to be aware of, that we maybe have to be consciously looking for because it might not be overt? And then, of course, we are almost always having to respect and value the author's work. So the author has a part to play too. They are likely the expert on this subject. They are likely an expert on their audience. So we need to make sure that we're valuing that and respecting that.